Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mysteries of life. This episode is a complement to the retreat I'm leading with my husband this fall at Hollyhock Lifelong Learning Center on Cortes Island. It's called Ritual and Practice for the Urban Homestead, and we'll tell you more about that at the end of this program. For now, I'd like you to listen to my guest, Matthew Remski. Matthew is a writer and yoga teacher trainer. He writes about yoga and Ayurveda in the shadows of capitalism and climate change. He's been practicing meditation and yoga since 1996, sitting and moving with teachers from the Tibetan Buddhist, Kripalu, Ashtanga, and Iyengar systems. He's written 8 books and recently what I would call an explosive article in The Walrus called Yoga's Culture of Sexual Abuse, 9 Women Tell Their Stories. I'm very delighted to welcome Matthew to the podcast. I connected with him online. So Matthew, what identities do you lead with?
It's a great question. I think they shift and are shifting as we speak, but for the most part, I work as a cultural critic within the yoga and meditation or global Buddhism industries. And I do that sort of parallel and on top of being a trainer, a teacher trainer for programs in Canada and internationally. And those two identities have a strange, sometimes frictious relationship that I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But I'm trying to make it work, and I'm heading more into investigative journalism too, with regard to the abuses and abuse patterns that I am witnessing and bearing witness to in yoga and Buddhism communities. I try, I think if those professional identities have merit, it would be because I've learned a couple of things about my own identity that make my blind spots clear. And I would say that getting more and more clear day by day on what it means to be white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered, and well-housed and well supported by family and in a country with socialized medicine and in a relatively safe neighborhood and these types of things has really put the content of my work into focus and has allowed me to see where I have to constantly work to see the positions and try to listen into the feelings of people who don't share all of those advantages. So, one big part of that has been in recognizing, especially through the work that I've done on Ashtanga yoga and the tragedy of Pattabhi Jois having assaulted his students for over 30 years, is that I had to learn how to write not just as an analyst of cults, but or high demand groups, but also as somebody who understood what it meant to listen to victims of sexual assault, which is not something that I've personally experienced, and I had a lot of help with that. There's a particular set of skills that go along with creating victim-centered narratives, and for white men endeavoring to learn those skills, there can be a lot of challenges, and that's why I've reached out for a lot of help, and I've received it from my editors of The Walrus, but also my interview subjects for pieces like that, who have been so extraordinarily brave and clear with me about what it is they need from reporting on their experience. So I think that begins to open that door, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for... Well, no, I think the question that so many listeners probably had, I know I had as you started to describe your work, was how as a white dude did you learn about your blind spots and your privilege. So thank you for anticipating that question, and so many thanks to your teachers, your interview subjects, and your editors, and I'm sure there are many others you didn't know, but for doing that work, to help you see what is so hard to see, and it's made invisible to you as a white dude. So how did you come to know so much about cults? Maybe you want to even define what is a cult, what's a high demand community? Are they the same thing? Like, can you talk about that a little bit? That's very compelling.
The language, the definitional qualities of the language are pretty poor, actually. There is a certain amount of consensus within the cult analysis literature about what the social mechanisms of high demand groups are, and the high demand group is a synonym for the cult, and I like to switch up the words because the word cult itself can be really inflammatory and isolating, especially for people within communities that are being investigated or examined and who haven't left them. Nobody wants to think of themselves as being part of a cult, but high demand group is a little bit is a little bit more digestible in the sense that many more people on the inside of an organization are going to be able to say, yeah, I do actually acquiesce or serve a high number of requests, and there can be an opening there, just language wise, for being able to examine one's relationship to a group. In terms of the social psychology, there's certain markers that analysts look at, and there's tools for measuring. So Kathleen Mann has something called the MIND model, which is based upon levels of manipulation. It's all acronyms, right? Manipulation, indoctrination, negation of individual self-sense and agency, and then deception. Steve Hassan has the BITE model, which is behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And then there are earlier examples coming from analysts like Michael Langone, who described the sort of three pillars of the cultic organization as being deception, dependence, and dread of leaving. Now, I feel the problem with those models for looking at what a high demand group tend to other the group itself and really obscure the fact that there are many areas of our lives in which we engage in toxic social dynamics, in groupthink or herd behavior, and we don't necessarily think of those as being as damaging as belonging to the People's Temple, and for sure most of us don't die in relationship to or because we're involved in the groups that we're involved in. But at the same time, I've been looking for a while for seeing what the relational quality is within the high demand group and how it relates to the members' previous relational strategies. And I came across just last year the innovative work of a woman named Alexandra Stein. She uses attachment theory, which is being used by basically every psychotherapist in the world to one degree or another, to describe what in a group sense happens to the member in relationship to their fellows and to the leaders of a high demand group. Her basic premise is that the main thing that a group does, and that perhaps defines a high demand group, is that it begins to rewire a member's attachment patterns towards the disorganized, so that they wind up in a very charged and hypervigilant, but also sometimes even ecstatic state, running towards the very source of care that is, or quote unquote care that is terrorizing them. And so her work has really helped me understand that it's much more beneficial to think about the types of relationships that we engage in our everyday lives and try to assess their health, rather than thinking of the high demand group as some sort of monolithic, sealed, bubbled off organization that you get a secret password into, and then you're suddenly on the inside and you can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
Not really like that. The boundaries of high demand groups are usually fairly porous. So it creates, looking at the relationships that are formed, I find is a lot more effective and a lot less stigmatizing as well to people who find themselves wrapped up in these situations.
Would you say then that, like, kind of from an attachment model, it's that easy to get in but hard to get out? It's like there's this sort of courtship wooing period that lowers defenses and orients you towards this, like, oh, this feels like a secure attachment figure. This feels safe. This feels soothing, etc. And then just in those moments, there's something jarring happens, but your system has been kind of lulled into the safety, and so it's hard to extract from that because it actually feels good as it's happening in a way.
It can feel wonderful. And I think the premise of it's easy to get in and hard to get out is quite apt, in the sense that as your relational patterns begin to change towards this highly charged exchange, in which you are constantly looking for the replenishment of the initial love bombing that you received from the leadership or the leader themselves of the particular group. And while you're having that fail as well, at the same time, what the group tends to do is it tends to eliminate outside safe havens. And so it becomes very common for a group member to really believe that the only place that they can be safe is in the place where they're being harmed. And that's the double bind that Stein starts to describe, and that I've seen in just hundreds of pieces of literature and hundreds of interviews with subjects who are either within or on the way out of groups like this. Yeah.
So you've publicly shared about having been in two different kinds of high demand groups, two different cults, and left them. So as you were coming across this research, was that like how there must have been quite a lot of recognition after the fact of what was happening, and perhaps that's very reorganizing for you, but can you talk a little bit about your experience of finding yourself in that situation and how you managed to extract yourself?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, for saying finding yourself in that situation, because that's exactly what it is. It's not, because usually the language is, why did you join? Why did you,
right.
Why did you go? Why did you get messed up with that guy? Why did you start believing those things? And, two sort of key points in my post-involvement research came in the form, well, one was, encountering Stein's theory and realizing that, it's not just about how I formed, really dysfunctional relationships under false pretenses, and they were highly charged in those particular involvements. But before that, I spoke with cult researcher Kathleen Mann by phone, and she said one sentence that relieved an incredible amount of shame and guilt. And that was, and for her, it was an everyday, observation. She said, people don't join cults; they delay leaving organizations that misrepresented themselves.
Oh.
And with that, and it's, you could say that to a woman, for example, who had suffered from sexual or domestic abuse for years and years at the hands of a spouse, And I think it would ring similar, right? Like you didn't you didn't sign up for that. You didn't get married to that person for that. You delayed leaving for a bunch of different really good reasons. Something that was not as it seemed, and that you were also gaslighted about. You were also told as you were being harmed that you weren't being harmed, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So those, yeah, there's been a couple of key moments that were really powerful. But rolling back before that, even before, while I was in the first high demand group, which was the Asian Classics Institute, which was founded by Michael Roach. So this is 1996 to 1999. I got a letter that I've written about from a friend that was like this. I still have it. It's I think it's typewritten, and it says, I know I'm worrisome, and I know that I'm neurotic, and I don't have my life sorted out, but and there's a part of me that's really envious of you for having found the way, the truth, and the life. But I'm wondering if there's a part of you, once you're finished with your Buddhist enlightenment fetish, that will still have time for somebody like me. And this is a really close friend of mine, and I remember reading it and kind of dissociating as I read it, and thinking, oh, that guy, he's sweet, but like he doesn't get it. He doesn't get what I'm going through, and I understand his concern, but sort of, but I didn't actually. And years and years later, I realized that it was contact like that with somebody who was somebody who knew me in my former life, who had a relationship with me outside of the demands and the logic of the group, who loved me, not because of where I was placed in the group or how much I knew about the group or how much I loved the group, but loved me because of a number of other reasons. That contact was a kind of reality check upon the rest of my commitments. And even though it didn't spring me out of jail, it did sink in somewhere, and I think it gave me the capacity to hear the next little hint from somebody like that somebody dropped, that, oh, there's an outside world where you are loved for other reasons, and there's an outside world where you can be secure and not reliant upon this machine that you are wrapped up in. And so those were really, really precious moments. And yeah, I think too that my previous learning in my I don't want to say like academic study, because I just really went to college for 2 years, but it was an effective 2 years, and I read a lot of cultural and literary theory when I was there, and I returned to that after I got out of the second group, and suddenly, Luce Irigaray and Sisu and Foucault and specifically Foucault's analysis of power really began to speak to me in a way that I could understand, because I had this visceral experience of having been in a control group.
And would you say that as a white man, you would have been a younger man at that time, but was that shocking? Was that the first time that you realized, like, oh my God, on the one hand, I hold a lot of power in the society, and on the other hand, even still, I managed to find myself beguiled and duped?
It's such a great question, and I think that there was about 10 years between me being able to use even the cultural and literary and subaltern theory that I loved to be self-reflective. I really just externalized it. I used it to critique the man in the form of the cult leaders that I've been involved with. But it did not sink down to the level of, wow, it's actually a shitload worse for a bunch of other people. And let me start to take a look at that. So that was, I feel that and there were two moments for that. One was, or I don't know, two sequences, and one was for me maybe around 2004, 2005, when I started reading somebody who might be controversial to your listenership, but at the time I found his writing really powerful. Derek Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, what a controversial figure. I have
right.
also read a lot of Deep Green Resistance stuff,
Right.
not so much of his particular writing, but others. Lier Keith.
Well, there was something about his. I found it easier. I think. Okay, what we're talking about, I feel that where we're exploring, Carmen, is how does one start seeing relational power and being self-reflective about it, mm-hmm. even if one has been exposed to something like a high demand group that has completely screwed over your agency and exploited you. Mm-hmm. So the reason that I started with, I think the reason that Derek Jensen was really effective for me, and then he went on to have adopt a bunch of views and positions that I don't agree with, and that I think are really unfortunate to scuttle a whole movement over. He said there's this opening. I think there's an opening page in one of his books where he says, every morning I have to wake up and make a decision about whether or not I'm going to write more criticism or if I'm going to go and blow up a dam. And I have to make that decision every morning, and I'm not quite sure how to do it. And I was like, oh, here I am. And I was way far away from that question. I was like, I have to wake up every morning and try to figure out how I can be the best yoga teacher I can be for a bunch of people in Cabbagetown, Toronto, in a very segregated neighborhood. And so there was this kind of call from the wild of look at what your choices are and look at how enmeshed you are in trying to make consumer economy look good and feel spiritual. And so that kind of got a little ball of, I think, profitable self-hatred rolling back then. And then really it was the eruption of or the sudden visibility, let's say, of the literature that poured out of the Black Lives Matter movement that and I think specifically, and I feel like really embarrassed. I don't know how you can avoid being embarrassed about knowing that there was a moment as a white person that you realized that you hadn't heard of the talk before, that right, that and I think by that point my son Jacob had been born, and I don't know whose description of the talk I came across, but I think it stopped my I think it changed the direction of my life, within about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I realized
I should pause because some people are like, "What talk is he talking about?"
Right. So the talk is common within POC culture, commonly understood in POC culture as being the moment where the parents, the caregivers, sit down with the 11, 12, 13-year-old young Black boy or a person of color, and tell him how not to be killed by police officers. Mm-hmm. Tell him how not to get in trouble with the law. Tell him how to avoid, systemic racial oppression. But the killing part was what I focused on. And I think around the same time, I've written about this as well. I had this like, for a number of reasons going back in my past, I have this overwhelming, almost uncontrollable rage response in the face of bullying. And I'm driving the car with my partner Alex and with Jacob, and there's construction in the road, and there's this big burly white cop in the intersection. He's directing traffic, and he's got aviator glasses on, and I don't understand his hand signals, and he starts swearing at me, and I can't hear what he's saying, but he's like turning red, swearing at me, and something like broke inside, as it does periodically for me. Like I would say once every 2 or 3 years, something like this happens. And I pulled over the car with my family inside, and I got out of the car, and in the middle of traffic, I almost like marched straight up to the guy, myself turning purple, saying, "You don't have the right to swear at me. Give me your badge number." And I think in the aftermath of that, I remembered the talk, and I was like, it didn't occur to me for a moment that I should be physically afraid of him. It didn't occur to me now this is in Toronto, so it's not in Chicago, or it's not in a handgun city, mm-hmm. but like I did something that was the automatic and like completely unconscious reflexive performance of entitlement, and I did it, and it felt good, and I got to have the feeling of it feeling good. Not only was I not afraid of doing it, but doing it I could feel good, and I could feel like I was less repressed, and I could feel like I had, and so there was actually this like, not only could I do it, I could feel therapeutic about it. and so I could get back at the guy who did that thing to me, and the blah blah, right? Like I could enact a kind of primal justice upon my own, certain circumstances of my childhood. I'm very familiar with the world of male violence, but it has always played out in like ostensible equal or even playing field, and so yeah, I that was a pretty stunning moment to realize what had happened there, and then a much subtler moment made me understand that like the form, shape, and sensation of actually being in my body, of having my body, as vulnerable as sometimes I feel, has nothing to do with what my partner feels when she realizes that she can't walk to the bus stop in our neighborhood at 3:00 in the morning. And we had this argument about it because I was going out to the airport and I was going to take an early flight, and I said, I'll just walk out to catch the nighttime bus. And we're in the East End, in the upper beaches, and close to Victoria Park Station, which is sometimes known for drug activity and so on. But my attitude is, this is my city. I can do this. I shouldn't. And not only should I not be restricted by fear, but also, why should I cede that territory to assaulters, right? Like, why should I, maybe I would be the person, so there's a little bit of like white knight fantasy going on there too as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I should be the person who'd be good, walking down the street, and so anyway, I'm having this conflict with my partner about whether or not I should do this, because she doesn't feel that it is a safe thing to do, and I'm realizing we have irreducibly different experiences of being human beings, and I think between those two things, I would say that those two things, the charging at the cop and being told by my partner what her experience is in a way that that I could finally listen to, or I could finally hear. And it wasn't, we're just talking about walking to the bus. It's not anything, incredibly dramatic, but it carries this load of trauma behind it. Those two things actually I describe now as spiritual awakenings, because I didn't learn. I studied yoga and Buddhism for, it's been like 20 years now, and more than like 25 years, and I didn't learn so much about the nature of my existence from anything else as much as I did from those two conversations, those two incidents.
Yeah, they sound like very focusing and locating events. And I want to repeat and amplify what you said about um, the co-occurrence of feeling embarrassed in a way once you realize actually what's happened.
Right.
I think that goes hand in hand. There's just no way to become aware of those blind spots in a way that feels like graceful and comfortable.
No.
And there's no way to, as a white person listening to this podcast, even who's just learned what the talk means, and that POC means people of color, there's no way to receive this education and this information in your body without it feeling uncomfortable and sometimes dissonant. So I want to kind of acknowledge anybody who's even listening to what you're talking about, who's feeling some somatic response right now, like, oh my God, I didn't know this stuff, or I've never thought about that. Because guess what? Anybody who's offering you some information you haven't heard of had to go through an uncomfortable self-reflection to moment eventually, right? So,
yeah, and I would say that. And just to connect a couple of themes here, one of the things that was so moving for me in learning about the role of deception on a social dynamic level as key to the functioning of a high demand group is that it really depersonalizes the event of involvement. What Kathleen Mann is saying, I'll come back to waking up in a social sense in a moment, but what Kathleen Mann is saying about deception and the fact that you didn't join the group but you delayed leaving it is very much pertinent here. You didn't, I did not choose the indoctrination of my gender and my racial privilege. It was something that I didn't see happening. It was completely, utterly invisible and normalized to me. And because of that, my embarrassment can be relieved. My guilt can be, functional to the extent that it's useful. But then I don't have to let it be some sort of, personalized, oh, I better go to therapy for this to clean up my internal landscape kind of thing. It can you can get over the guilt response by recognizing that you were deceived into thinking that your situation was normal. It's not. It's not. It never was. And normal to you, yes, but not normal in the capital N sense. And yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder. That's good medicine for the self-loathing that can come along with it. Now, you've written very extensively about high demand communities and cults, and we've talked a lot about your strong critique of yoga communities, particularly with regard to sexual abuse and assault. Recently, a lot of your writing is focused on a real-time critique of the unraveling of the Shambhala Buddhist meditation community. You called it an industry earlier. And you not only blog about this, but your work's been in these really high profile publications like The Walrus, like Yoga International, Huffington Post, etc. So I'm curious, what is most egregious for you in light of all this from the perspective of your other role as a yoga teacher trainer? Like, how do you stay in relationship with yoga and the wider yoga community in light of all this?
It's such a great question. It's and very hard to answer, but I'll give it a shot. I think that what is most egregious about institutional abuse and high demand group dynamics in yoga and meditation communities is that people come to these methods, techniques, and gatherings of people with a lot of wounds and with very tender aspirations, and they are betrayed in a way that I think is a lot more sophisticated than the ways in which abuse betrayal happens in non-spiritual or let's say in political high demand groups.
Mm-hmm.
I say that and then I hesitate because I think people who have been members of political cults will say that they were equally betrayed and deceived and so on. But there's something particularly egregious about being offered spiritual or therapeutic healing and being given the opposite, and then being told that you are still being given spiritual and therapeutic healing. So there's just an ugly irony there. And I think in yoga and Buddhist high demand groups and in groups where we see institutional abuse and betrayal, we're also looking at an industry, as I call it, that has risen up in the age of neoliberal self-care and responsibilism. So these are environments that exist in part not only because of the excesses of consumer capitalism, not only because a certain layer of slice of the population has room on their credit card to be able to do workshops and retreats, and they can do international travel and whatever it takes to take their practice to the next level. Like that is all there's an economic freedom there that is characteristic of late capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And allows people to do it, but the techniques and the methods themselves are also being offered as a substitute, or they're being slid into the gaps of what's been torn away in terms of basic liberal democratic ideals of the social contract that have been eroding for the last 40 years. So this is much more of a problem in the States than it is in a place like Canada. And one of the things that I always like to say when I'm in training programs is, be more careful with the charismatic American yoga teacher than with the charismatic Canadian yoga teacher, because the charismatic American yoga teacher is offering what they offer within the context of complete social contract decay. Just taking healthcare for an example. Most yoga teachers that I know in the States are self-employed and marginally insured, if insured at all. And what that means is that practice and self-care for them can take on an even more evangelical charge, not only because they need it, because they have no other healthcare support, but they also are moving in environments in which people are looking for answers that the society has not provided, and they're made self-responsible for those answers. And so add to that scenario in which yoga and meditation begins to become like an ersatz form of healthcare and self-regulation, and then is commodified by various management styles to increase productivity. Add to that the specter of an unregulated industry that is rife with institutional abuse, and you really have, an interlocking series of problems. This thing that we went to for self-care because we told ourselves from the 1980s onwards that the nanny state was a bad thing, is actually unregulated. And because it's unregulated, or in part because it's unregulated, charisma is the primary coin of its leadership. And that means that opens the communities themselves that offer these tools to real vulnerabilities of relational abuse.
Right. Well, and what you're talking about is the yoga version of what my husband and I have started referring to as the Netflix Breaking Bad genre, where people start doing unlawful things because their healthcare bills are out of control, like, Breaking Bad or this new Good Girls. Like, there's this whole kind of genre of Americans who can't get out of hospital debt. And so they get into a life of crime, and that becomes sort of funny, but also very normalized, and become these sort of charismatic, like, thugs or gang leaders, like reclaiming agency. And it's this like empowerment narrative that I'm like, oh my God, you guys. But the other thing that you said a few minutes ago that like just lit me up with delight, and as I'm thinking about it, I can't quite tell why, but I'd love for you to say more about it, was when you said the phrase self-care and responsibilism.
Yeah.
What is responsibilism? Because it sounds like a thing that I see everywhere, but I can't define it, but I'm delighting in it. Can you just clarify that?
Right. Yeah. It sounds like a virus that you want to be able to look at under the microscope. And the only, as far as I know, I came across the term first in a fantastic essay that maybe we can link to, called "This Is Not Your Practice Life," which is a critical review of how Lululemon uses marketing, sort of vague, Orientalist, triumphalist, individualist marketing language, and attaches it somehow to yoga theory in order to sell lifestyle products and a particular vision of what ends up being entitled positionality.
And we'll definitely link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's two Canadian sociologists, Levrance and Lazansky, and as far as I understand it, responsibilism is the neoliberal programming of the citizen to self-monitor and to always as the first line of inquiry to say, what could I be doing better, and how can I be more fit in a whole bunch of different ways, fit for a gaseous economy, fit for the precariat, fit for all of these changes that are coming. How can I learn to surf and roll and flow with the chaos that we're just going to be taking as given, because there are no guarantees anymore, right? So here's a mindfulness app for you to take care of yourself with. We're going to do yoga classes on break at Google headquarters, and here is the Lululemon manifesto that gives you 18 points of self-directed activity that you can do every day to make sure that you can afford $90 yoga pants, as if that works, right? So responsibilism, as far as I know, is this very broad indoctrination technique that tells the neoliberal consumer that that they are in charge of their destinies. And of course, the shadow side of that statement, the thing that people only really, as they self-identify on the alt-right, will say in public is, and that means if you fail, it's your own damn fault. If you're not getting by, if you're not succeeding. And then But what I like about that term is that it's very broad based, and it's abstract, and I can see it in a systems theory way. But I also feel it as containing a number of layers related to some of the privilege issues that we've brought up before. And as I'm speaking about it now, I'm thinking about how powerfully gendered this principle would be, that levels of responsibilism foisted upon women and the multiple roles of labor that they're asked to perform is going to add another, sort of depth to the self-monitoring and then to intersect that with issues of race and class. It's going to get heavier all the way down in terms of the social hierarchy. Mm-hmm. It's going to cost you more. The less privilege you have, the more your responsibilism or the society's demand that you be responsible is going to cost.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for bringing this to the collective again as well, that because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about high demand groups is because when I think about converging emergencies like the chaos that can come from social change, the environmental crises that we're seeing, and I think about sort of the big umbrella term of collapse, often the antidote or solution or one of the medicines we can turn to is community. And community is sort of tossed around as this thing like, oh, it's so important, we need connection and community. And people don't talk so much about how freaking hard it is, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna spring up a community around this whatever, right? And it often is a bit capitalist, like, we pay to be part of, let's say, a retreat. I lead these things. So I understand, I'm saying this fully recognizing the hypocrisy and irony of charging for the things that I do, because I'm trying to find and create and nurture a revillaging process. But the thing is, I really do believe in the importance of revillaging as a notion. I really do believe we have to reconnect to the importance of community, and that we have to do the attachment repair work required to tolerate more obligation to each other and this compassionate care for our neighbor, which I think is, like you pointed out, kind of the difference between the American charismatic yoga leader and the Canadian. Canadians have a certain amount of social safety net still in place, where we do have this fundamental structure based on our belief in a compassionate responsibility and obligation to our neighbor. Right. But I do sometimes worry that there's a blurry line between a high degree of personal and relational and ethical obligation to each other, and then these high demand cult communities. And I say that having been a person who has, for instance, gone to extended programs, quote unquote, schools that are about, I guess you could loosely call it revillaging, or maybe ancestral repair, or, trying to cope with the melancholy of being displaced white settler, all that kind of stuff. And what I find is I'm like, holy shit, people that I consider extremely well-educated, informed, literate, on top of things, kind of capitulating to these high demand, I don't know what you'd even call it. It's so atmospheric, right? But it's like, suddenly it's like, wow, everybody's kind of dressing alike, and there's a way of speaking. And if you don't speak that way, if you don't speak that way, then you're kind of on the outs. And if you ask certain questions, then you're asking the wrong question, or I'm going to answer your question that you should have asked. There's this kind of mental Aikido. So how do we know?
You're really okay. You said so many things there, and I want to make sure I don't miss any of them. But you're really onto something with affect, with understanding somatic affect in a group. And there comes a point I think, where anybody involved in an aspirational community or movement might step back and say, why am I mirroring everyone around me? Or what is that thing that that person does when they walk in the room? And everybody kind of like mimics it. And
Yeah.
what is, what are the keywords here? Like if we recorded everything that we said for the day, and then we ran it through an AI for indexing like the top words, do we really know what those words mean?
Yeah, I'll give you one. Grief soaked. Like, do people talk like that normally? Like, there's these like dog whistle terms that you're like, how come that particular turn of phrase is like everywhere all of us? Like, how? Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry
you
to
know,
interrupt.
maybe
You're activating me.
I'm very happy to say that that is not in my circles. I have not come across that term, but the ennui with which you say it, I believe that it's a huge feature of your West Coast life, and I empathize. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry for your grief-soaked life. Um, okay, I think if we let's take, I think that keyword thought experiment is really important, because um, my bet is that if you're in an aspirational community and there is a word that comes up, a term that comes up over and over and over again, and you see it at the top of that index, of that, at the top of that usage list, prevalence list, my bet is that you're not really going to be able to define it. And my bet too is that because of its indefinability, it's going to stop most conversations, because there's going to be like a group assumption about what it means, about what it means to be grief-soaked, for example. But I think the word community itself is kind of like that. It gets used so often and so in such a charged way, with so much freight, that it always feels like there's a capital C at the beginning of it. And this is where I go right back to, you know, my college days, and I remember how Derrida described the transcendental signifier, the word that has been used so often and is invested with so much cultural power that it is, first of all, undefinable, but secondly, it's designed to cast a spell over the group of its users, who are asked to believe that everybody shares the same definition for it. So, and when you get things like that, we're not talking about you know, we're not talking about community as something that has, I don't know, necessarily local real world roots, but something that is invested with a kind of mystique. And as soon as that happens, then we have the commodification problem that you're talking about. And especially in yoga communities, I'm going to use the word community itself is kind of the is a buzzword for you know, effective branding of shared interests. And I don't know much about you. You're using the word revillaging, and I'm sure there's a huge literature behind it. But what I've noticed in the groups that I move amongst is that there's a huge difference between the people that you do aspirational activities with when you are white and heterosexual and middle class, and, you know, the people that you end up spending time with if, you know, you have a regular job as a transit worker, or if you drive a cab, or, you know, if you go to the community center for your fitness needs. And so as I think about community in my own life, I am starting to ask questions about why do I want to find like-minded people? Why do I want to find people who will mirror my own elevated posture and language back to me? Why do I want to be validated by you know, people who think that I have good ideas? Why am I not spending more time talking over the back fence with the guy who, I don't know what my neighbor does for a living, honestly. I know his name, I know how many children he has, but I don't know his world. Now, he's white and straight like I am, so if I want to learn more than that, I know that I'm going to have to, break out of the segregation of my neighborhood. And so I try to do that, and when I do, like I play handball at the community center with guys who work as security guards and bus drivers, and only about 20% of the community center is white, and I have this. It might be vicarious. I might be like a class tourist in a way when I go there, but I also have the sense of, oh, I'm trying to actually form bonds with people in which I'm not trying to sell them shit, including myself. And that is totally different from, most of the experiences that I've had in yoga and meditation communities over the last 15 years.
So what have you learned about how one might avoid the culty path and cultivate the community path? It sounds like there's something about geography, real time, something like that. Could you, if you had any advice for somebody who was thinking, oh, I do want a sense of belonging, after they've gone through those questions of, well, why do I want people just like me? Do you have any advice for, like, okay, if you're now moving into wanting to be in community, what should they watch for so that it doesn't get too culty?
I think the red flag is the somatic charge. To me, anyway. That might be different for other people, but like, I don't know if you knew my late friend Michael Stone.
I've heard of him posthumously.
Yeah. Right. So very, very complex and moving figure, and a tragic death just over a year ago. And I mourn him and I miss him. And I'm not bringing him up in the context of a high demand group, but I am going to suggest that people who were drawn to him were drawn to something radiant, drawn to something charismatic. They were drawn to the crackle in the room when he spoke. That was his. It was his voice. It was his body. It was his, brilliance, or his improvisation, and I would say that whenever so he just comes to mind when I think about what do we want to be aware of in aspirational communities in terms of the capacity for power imbalances to grow, because that's where it starts. Is that when the leader is felt to be, is asked to be, performs as if they are some sort of special person, and when they do that because they are invested with a kind of internal value that you really can't verify. It's not like the leaders of yoga and meditation groups are go through peer review or something like that. They didn't, the academic model is actually pretty smart when it comes to, oh, did you have something original to say and can you back it up? But nobody who heads an aspirational community has to do that, and we should think really hard about that. What does that mean? It means that in the absence of authorization structures, that charisma, that crackle, that brilliance, which is not bad in and of itself, and going back into pre-modern times, it would have been the only thing that really adhered groups together in these ways, but that becomes the only value of validation. The primary coin of the realm of the high demand group is charisma. And so I would say for the person who, runs into the aspirational group, just ask yourself, who's the person who seems to want to be at the front of the room and who is behaved deferentially towards. Who opens their mouth and then everybody goes, okay. Who sits up, who enters the room and makes everybody else sit up a little bit straighter, either wanting their attention or wanting to embody whatever that person has or seems to have, because often they're performing rather than embodying.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some starting points. It's like if some of your listeners can quickly Google a guy named Adyashanti.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know anything about how this guy runs his groups. I don't know how he runs his personal relationships. So I'm not going to say that he runs or he's part of a high demand group, but ask yourself, what gives a person, especially if they're white and male and in their 60s and somewhat handsome, what gives a person the authority to sit on a chair in front of a room of 300 people who are quietly gazing at him, waiting for the next thing that he's going to say, not because he's reading it from notes, but because it's coming out of his innermost selfiness or whatever. Like what put him there? And if you really ask that question, you're asking about group power dynamics in a very profound way, and I think it might be a bit of a vaccine.
Thank you. Very good advice. Thank you, Matthew. Locating this in the larger planetary context of climate change, because that's kind of my jam these days. I mean, it has been for over a decade, but this episode is sort of part of I could loosely call it a mini series where I'm really centering this part of my life in terms of collapse awareness and how myself and my guests are approaching adaptation to changing climate. Do you think much about the converging emergencies of climate change and social chaos and collapse much in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because it highlights for me a very basic and daily split that I think I experience, which is, so do I think much about it? Yeah, I think much about it. In what part of my brain? In the part of my brain that I have quarantined off into don't know what I can do area. And I'm going to keep doing what I know how to do well and hope that it helps that other part. But I often don't see the concrete relationship between those things. I have the sense that the professional work that I do in yoga and Buddhism communities is, even though I try to reach out into the accessibility movement and do as much work as I can in service organizations, and I love the Yoga Service Council, for example. At the same time, I feel like I'm in a fairly rarefied world that has, little social and political impact on the things that actually really matter to, the bodies of the people around me. And so, so this brings up the question of like, is there a relationship between yoga and meditation and internal work and self-regulation and social change? And the person who's educated me most on that is a woman named Bea Schofield, who, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, finally totally cleaned my clock in some debate about whether or not yoga and meditation practice made you a better citizen. And the answer is no, it doesn't. Training to be a better citizen and learning from marginalized people makes you a better citizen. That's the answer. But but one of the pernicious things about the industry that I work in is that it runs on this premise that you know, practice will somehow make you into a more effective, more progressive person. Not everybody believes that, but that's a strong undercurrent. And that's just totally wrong. It's distracting. And so I live with this split. Like I feel that I'm the earner in our family of four now, and I know this industry fairly well, and I can consult in it, and I can write about it, and I can interview people within it, and I can shed light in certain areas. But I do wonder about its portability, and I hope at some point. So you know, in my wilder imagination. I sometimes tell myself that doing this work is giving me the skills to be able to write the book about the intersection of the alt-right and high demand groups as expressed through the ascendancy of somebody like Jordan Peterson. And then that will be, and then I tell myself, well, that will be more useful politically. Like that will reach a larger audience. That'll have more of an impact. So I'm kind of thinking in that direction, trying to unquarantine that part of my brain that is utterly, absolutely paralyzed and terrified by every single bit of climate news that I come across.
Well, one of the constellations that I see, if I can make a connection for you, is that often when there is an experience of dissolution or turmoil socially, it creates opportunities for more zealotry and the deification of gurus. And it would not surprise me if the kind of neoliberal late stage capitalism project actually did give rise, as things get worse, to more of that responsibilism and more gurus and more of this spiritual cleansing through capitalist opportunities for that, you know. And so I can see how so I'm going to nudge you in that direction because I do see a very direct correlation between climate change, social turmoil, and the rise of gurus.
Yeah, I try to just a point, a small point of order. I try to not use the word guru because of it will have like for some people it will have like a neo-colonial echo to it, and really what it's usually applied to in yoga and Buddhist communities is a leader who is at best parroting some aspect of an Indian wisdom tradition. and so a number of people have pointed out in a critical way that the term itself is probably best analyzed as a product of globalization rather than as a something that accurately describes the leadership. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I think it's a commonly used term, but thank you for the nudge. And I will say that attending Peterson's events is definitely like attending the charismatic revivalism of any one of a number of high demand groups, on a somatic level, on a trance level, on an epistemological level. People do not show up at his events to be given a a set of critical thinking positions or tools. They show up at his events to bask in the social dynamic of kind of revivalism of regressed sentiments.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, like thank you for the nudge. I don't know how to generalize it. And I don't really want to be like the person who's the sniper from the gallery and says, okay, well, this person is popping up. Let's roll out an analysis. It would be nice if I could think of a book proposal that gave some sort of fundamental education that was readable and digestible in what does it feel like to start to drift into a high demand group, and what to do about it. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, I like that you've just seeded that right there, and I'll keep watching for it. I really have appreciated you connecting the dots between the work you've done with the yoga community, meditation communities, and drawing those parallels over to the rise of figures like Peterson, and your analysis of him in particular. I can't help but notice that not only are there similar do I have similar experiences of people that, like, I'm shocked, I'm surprised that they are gravitating towards his work or reposting his work, but they're often the same people that are, in other Grief Soak communities. So I really appreciate that you are casting the net a little wider, because it's a social and human dilemma, because it is about attachment, and it is about our bodies. It's about how we feel when we're, basking in the glow of the mystique. So talking a bit about bringing that back into the body and into how we feel, I'm curious how you personally cope with the big emotions like grief and rage. I appreciate you sharing the survival rage response of, like, charging out of your car, because I've broken like that too. I literally screamed into a room of people at a big conference. We were doing a deep democracy process, and just the amount of, like, both latent and overt white supremacist thinking. I just got so dysregulated. I literally screamed into the room, I don't want to hang out with idiot white people anymore. And
right.
I was supposed to be one of the facilitators, but it like psychologically broke me. And afterwards was like, I'm very sorry, what I said was ableist. But I can't say that my sentiment feels any different, but sometimes.
So you walked it back like a little bit.
Only to one person.
Right.
I couldn't walk it back in the room. I just couldn't. Right. I mean, I stayed in the room, but yeah, one person said, I didn't appreciate, I don't appreciate being called an idiot. And I said, because I'm white. I don't appreciate being called an idiot because I'm white. And I said, you're right. That's an ableist thing to say. And it's not because you're white. It's because of how you're thinking and you're being right now. And, it's not because, or she said, because of the color of my skin. I said, it's not because of the color of your skin. It's because whiteness is a way of being and thinking. Anyway, so it was kind of a whole thing. Right. But I generally, I have other tools that I use to try to cope with rage, and sometimes it just sort of like busts out. So in your not as extreme moments, how do you cope with grief and rage?
Yeah. Well, I wonder whether sometimes I honestly wonder whether I'm not, and I wonder whether I will follow in the footsteps of my grandfather and my uncles who, develop heart disease very suddenly at a certain point, because I think as male identified, I have been trained to sublimate grief and rage into work, and I've been trained to substitute intellectual work for emotional work, and I'm no stranger to therapy, and it's been an incredible blessing in my life. And of course, yeah, I've done a fair bit of yoga and meditation, and I'm no stranger to introspection, but you can never really know, can you? How you're dealing with this thing, which is inseparable from daily living. And so, I'll just say to the listeners that Carmen sent this question ahead, and I was really taken aback. I was like, wow, that's an amazing, really, really thoughtful question. And so I wanted to thank you for asking that. Nobody's really asked me anything like that before. And what I'd say is that the rage I feel I'm able more or less to discharge through, really intense physical activity. That is that's, handball has been really helpful. And there's something about playing handball with guys who don't give a shit about yoga and meditation that is specifically really helpful. And, especially playing handball with, I don't even know his last name. I call him Handball Dave, but he's the guy who texts everybody and makes sure that we're there on time. And I missed when Michael died. I went out to Pender Island for the funeral, and so I missed a couple of weeks. And all he said when I came back, he said, well, I missed you, grasshopper. And I said, yeah, and I felt like I was going to cry. I was right on the edge, and I said, yeah, a friend of mine died. And and there was a pause, and I felt awkward, and I felt like I should say how, right? Like I should, I shouldn't just leave it hanging. And I said, yeah, he was my age, and he died of fentanyl poisoning. And Dave just looked at me completely blank, totally stony faced. And then he paused, like he didn't say anything, but he looked straight at me. And then he just handed me the ball, and he said, it's your serve. And, this is not like a revillaging moment. You're not going to have this interaction on Hollyhock. This is there was something normal and repressed and undressed up and untherapeutic and non-holding spacey, but holding spacey at the same time. And yeah, so that was powerful. That was it. He allowed me to feel what I was feeling, but not to perform what I was feeling. And then something like that. Who knows what the hell he was. I'm projecting onto him as much as I would project onto a therapist, I'm sure. But yeah, with grief, I spend most of my time interviewing people who have been abused by high demand groups. And I'm not a therapist. I don't get to go to a supervisor and ask them how I'm doing. I go to my own therapy, but it's not, you don't get a lot of time with that. And I think I do another splitting thing to deal with grief. There's the part of my brain that is quarantined off with the echoes of Derek Jensen, wondering why I'm not blowing up bridges. And then there's a part of my brain that I can trip over into and just think about my children, like think about their faces and their hands and their hair and their jokes. And little Owie learning how to talk, and Manitoulin Island, and so I don't know. I think that's just. I mean, sometimes it feels dissociative, but sometimes those two worlds are together, and I can also fall asleep with a feeling of grief, but also not only holding my children, but also thinking about my partner and whatever incredibly smart thing she said that day, or the way she, is able to ask me the right question at the right time, or reflect something back to me. And I don't know how I've learned how to be able to do that. Maybe meditation had something to do with it, but I can go to that place. I can go to that place of secure attachment and rest there for a while, at least a while. And then, Alex was also telling me, as I told her you were going to ask me this question, she said, well, you also eat a lot of cookies. And I said, yeah, that's true. So.
These all seem like very legit responses. So thank you for sharing all of that, Matthew. Thank you for everything you've shared in this episode. This has been good food for me too.
Yeah, me too.
Better than a cookie. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Well, that was a super interesting and, for me, very satisfying conversation. What a delightful guest, profound thinker. This man speaks my mind. And I would like to welcome back to the show another man who speaks my mind, with whom I really enjoy deep conversation, extended conversations, lots of processing and debriefing. Ruben Anderson, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Hello, world.
I loved this conversation, and as Matthew was talking, there were so many times where I was like, oh, I think Ruben's going to like that. Oh, I can't wait to ask him about that. We've listened to this conversation. I feel like I want to listen to it even again. But what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. So there's kind of one big thought I have that I would like to talk about, but I found it super interesting because in my behavior change research, which is kind of my big body of work, a super important thing was reading a book about cults, which was written by Douglas Rushkoff called Coercion. So that was, it was really an important little kind of keystone piece for me in that. So then here Matthew comes in talking about these high demand situations. So that was super interesting. He had some really great sentences talking about, I kind of want to start always at the back end of things and build back up, but I don't know quite where to start with his beautiful sentences. So he talked about the irreducibly different experiences of being human beings. The irreducibly different experiences. And he framed that as, which I really resonated with, as kind of like the white man's realization that everyone else has an irreducibly different experience than we do. And he called them spiritual awakenings. And then he leads that on into these other great sentences, like, I did not choose my indoctrination of my racial and gender privilege. And he mentions that in terms of getting over the guilt response that white men, or, say white people have about racism, men have about sexism and misogyny. So that when you realize you didn't choose, that you were deceived. You get over the guilt response by realizing you were deceived.
Well, and so all of this speaks to why I thought you were going to love this conversation, because as you said, it has so many parallels to your work in behavior change. And of course, you're normally talking to rooms full of white men about why isn't your recycling campaign working after a certain point. And, this is why you as a consultant, you go into organizations that are like, okay, we want to talk about behavior change. And you go in and be like, okay, well, the first thing is, it's not about education. It's not about, like hammering. It's not all of these things that you're used to. It's
fundamentally about the irreducibly different experience that human beings have.
Yeah. And so you came out with like this, well, actually I came up with this phrase while we were in the shower about, it's about a compassionate systems approach. And so this is why, like, I'm doing this kind of mini series on collapse and how we deal with like large scale cooperation dilemmas when we have these irreducibly different human experiences. How do we deal with that? And you've kind of come up with compassionate systems, and it's so interesting that something about, you've talked about coercion before as a book and cited it with me, but I didn't realize it was actually about cults. So I love that there's all these parallels kind of circling back. This is why this is relevant. I knew there was a thread.
Yeah, I think thinking back, the entire book may not be about cults, but there's kind of a significant chunk of it about cults. And the reason, it's interesting to try to think of my understanding of behavior through Matthew's words. The reason that recycling systems don't work is because they don't account for the irreducibly different experiences of being human. So they're designed by largely white male engineers with no consideration for the irreducibly different experiences of women and children and people that don't make an engineer's salary and people that don't live in an engineer's size home.
And have different demands on their lives that are, And so there's these like monolithic systems. Of course, anyway, it's a whole different podcast to talk about compassionate systems, but that compassionate approach of recognizing that like, oh yeah, I didn't sign up to be in this abusive relationship, or I didn't sign up for this high demand community. I signed up because I was interested in exploring grief or something, but then I delayed the leaving of it because actually it's hard to get out because there's all these like atmospheric things that are occurring that make me kind of question, like, is it me? Am I faulty?
He quotes the person that he got this from. So I wrote it down. It's Kathleen Mann. And she said, people don't join cults. They delay leaving organizations that had misrepresented themselves.
Well, and I think this is so relevant to the white supremacy question, right? So I think one of the reasons, well, I shouldn't say the reasons, but one of the things that people who are white, who are settler, don't realize is that they have been deceived through their education, through our legal system, through kind of the propaganda of capitalism, whiteness, neoliberalism, all of that, to believe that we are all equal, that we just have to bootstrap, we all have the same opportunity. And once you realize, oh my God, I have been lied to by every institution, since the moment I was born, things have been invisibilized to me, then I think it's much easier to start to want to leave, capital W whiteness, or leave capital C capitalism and unhook. But it's the seeing what is actively, relentlessly being invisibilized for you and being told that you are the one who is not functioning. You're the one who doesn't get it, that it's your problem, that responsibilism. Oh God, I loved that. He said it and I was like, I don't even know what you mean, but I feel like I know what you mean, and I love it. Say more.
Yeah, I wrote that down as well. The neoliberal self-care and responsibilism. And then he said one more thing, which was the neoliberal programming of the citizen to self-monitor, which is what you were just talking about, is they making this about the individual, the individual's flaws instead of the physical system or social system's flaws. So for the thing that, for me, as you said, you invented the term compassionate systems, which I apply to things like recycling, that the reason, if we want recycling to work better, we need to make the operational system more compassionate and more respectful of the reality of human beings' mental capacity, physical capacity, their social capacity, so until we were actually truly loving of people, we're going to keep designing systems that are fundamentally abusive of people, as our current recycling system is, as our current whatever, as our current electoral system is, all these systems that are actually abusive. They're very hateful. They're
of human nature,
of human beings. They're misanthropic. So for me, Matthew just kept kind of illustrating, he kept drawing out new examples of how compassion actually makes more sense. So the people don't join cults, they delay leaving organizations that had misrepresented themselves. So we tell all these stories about people, that the people who join cults are weak.
They join that's the first thing.
Yeah.
There was no,
But you don't actually join. You just go to yoga.
Yeah.
You just go to yoga class.
You go to a retreat.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So you take this active, positive step, which is not a joining of any horrible organization, right? We talk about addicts as being weak or pathetic human beings. We talk about various groups of people as being lazy or stupid or whatever, we talk about apathy a lot. Like that's rolled out. Like, why don't people recycle? Why don't they drive less? Why don't they care about the climate? Oh, it's because they're apathetic. So it's all these judgment words of humanity.
Right. But let's be clear. People are being deceived.
Yeah. Well, people are being deceived. So that's the kind of his contribution, and then my perspective is that people also have a very limited capacity. We're only awake for so many hours in the day. We can only think for many fewer hours of the day than that. We have physical limitations to what we can lift, what we can carry, how far we can run,
how much we can think,
and how much we can think. We have a physical limitation to how much we can think. So if you start looking, if you take as your assumption that almost everyone, 99.999% of people are fundamentally good people that want to be good people, want to be productive members and contributing members of society, don't want to cause harm, are trying to do the right thing, and then you start looking for it's like, okay, so if that's our base assumption, and then, so then how do you explain intravenous drug addiction? And it's because of actually extreme trauma. Deep abuse
that's perpetuated and revisited again and again by systems and the stories we tell.
And then I want to go back a little bit, if I can interrupt you there, is that so then again he talks about the guilt, getting over the guilt of, say, of being white or being male. And I think that, again, it's like, it's not that white men are bad, but they have been indoctrinated into a system. They are operating properly.
He used the word being trained. So it's not just about individual will.
Yeah, exactly. So white men operate properly within a psychopathic system.
Yes, exactly. That's working perfectly and churning out more psychopaths. I also I want to steer this back a little bit. I want to point out something that I didn't say in the interview with Matthew, but I was thinking quite a bit, was something I notice, not just in high demand groups, but in contexts where there is potential for large amounts of followers, or like the potential for these high demand groups. The incidents that I see so frequently is that the fellow at the mic is, as Matthew said, white man of a certain age, handsome, and he's in this, don't ask me questions, he's in the trance, and he's speaking off the top of his head. And I've seen this with people who are supposed to do that, like great poets, David Whyte. But I see women who, and they're of different ages, my peers, but also younger women, older women, but they just love a man of a certain age who's read a lot of books and can recite poetry, right? Because there aren't many of them. My friend Carolyn, I was telling her about this, I'm like, I can't help but notice that these high demand groups are run by men who have read poetry. And she said, but if Reuben got up, and I was like, oh my God, with his mellifluous voice, bees to honey, obviously. But that this is why I am...
bees to nectar.
bees to nectar. Let's just be very clear. Oh, even that is charming. That you you know that because you're a beekeeper. Bees to nectar. It's true that there is something that that expression, that mythopoetic expression of masculinity that has become so rare, is like irresistible in patriarchal culture. Women can't help it. And people that I like know and respect, but when I hear like who they like, who they love, who they're following, I'm like, oh, what do you know? You're falling in love again with another, man with like another silver fox who gets us into trance. We like the feeling. And there's something funny about that I haven't gotten into, but it reminds me of attachment stuff. It's like maybe some typical daddy stuff, but it's also something about, wouldn't it be nice if the patriarchy could be gentle? It's like wanting to be taken care of or something, but it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous because this, I feel, is so dangerous because there is we all have internalized training of power and rank and all this kind of stuff, and we're so conditioned, and it's so familiar that we create the pedestals, we create these things unconsciously, and so this is why, like, my friend Holly and I talk about, like, if I can avoid it, I don't give my money to white men. I want to redistribute wealth, and I want to check myself because this is a danger, and we see it everywhere, even with the best of intentions. It's like, whoa, this seems like a really great program, but I can't help but notice everybody's white, and the person at the mic is an old dude with long hair, and he's silver, and he speaks articulately.
Yeah. So give me a little bit of a leash here, Carmen.
Okay.
Let me respond to that, because I think you're right, and you and I have talked about this in a way that I would like to refer to specifically in just a minute. I think if I again, as I just said, like, if we look at something and try to find the compassion through it, I would guess that the draw to the old white man at the mic is a lack of elderhood. It's an impoverishment of elderhood, right? And what we actually want is more and better eldering.
Yeah, but it gets pretty meta when they're talking about grieving a lack of elderhood.
I asked you to give me some leash.
Sorry, I know. Okay, go ahead.
So, because I'm going to lose my train of thought. You can see the impoverishment of the system of elderhood in that it should be inconceivable for an elder to then have sex with someone who is so gaga over them, right? And so that is the condition that Matthew is talking about so much. That is not a healthy system of elderhood. You know? So definitely what we want is a healthy integration of elderhood in our society, which we truly don't have. We don't have this kind of stores of wisdom and experience and nuance and etc. The thing that you and I have talked about is that this wise person at the mic, this wise man at the mic, isn't a bad thing. The thing that is bad is that it is inconceivable that it would ever be a woman.
Yeah.
And we know a man at the mic, and we know women who are his close students, and it's inconceivable that they would ever take the mic. And much younger men think that they have a role at the mic. Yes.
And the other thing too is that, and if those women did take the mic, they would have to do it very differently in order for them to receive the adulation that the man at the mic has. And what feels so like painful for me in those rooms is just how quickly men and women alike are like, yeah, but he's so charming and funny. Like, they just lay down that it's like, no, there's some problems here. Yeah. And also, I will say that it's very rare. So I agree with what you're saying, and it's a much more compassionate lens to take, that like we shouldn't have a problem with an elder at the mic sharing wisdom. Absolutely. We shouldn't have a problem. And one of the red flags I just want to like throw up there that I've seen so many times is like, even the most meta, self-aware, well-located, intersectional in this moment in history that I've been able to be in the room with them, when asked, so where are the women in your stories? Or so to a man, there is a defensive, well, you just don't get it. And so then when Matthew says there's a kind of mystique that's a little ineffable and it kind of comes across as the, well, you just don't get it. It's so heartbreaking and so disappointing. It's just like, oh, everything in me just drops. And, you know, I'm kind of processing, you and I have personal experiences with this, but I've had it also when we weren't together. It was so wonderful for you and I to have both be in the same room at the same moment and be like, oh, it's happening again.
Right.
So anyway, it was so refreshing to be able to hear Matthew's analysis, and I'm super happy to be able to share it with you. So listeners, if you'd like to hang out with Ruben and I while we continue to parse out the nuance of cultivating community without becoming a cargo cult in the age of collapse. and if you want to process your eco-grief and climate despair with like-minded people and learn how to co-regulate without any demand or request or even subtle atmospheric pressure for you to grow your hair long like Ruben or start talking like me, why don't you meet us on Cortez Island at Hollyhock, and we'll try to gather in a non-culty way for ritual and practice for the urban homestead. It's happening in September. Get all the information at carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola. Till next time, take care.
Bye-bye.